be on day, the 9 to 5, and here we are. So excited to be on your show. I've listened to a couple of them. Really enjoy what you're doing.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
Of course.
Let's get into your creative journey. So one thing that I have absolutely no idea about, and I've been wondering, is how did the cargo ship poet come to be? The name and the persona.
So probably about 12 years ago, watching the History Channel, and they were talking about a cargo ship named the Poet that vanished in the Bermuda Triangle in the early 80s. I do believe it was 1980. And they said the cargo ship Poet, and it just jumped out of me. And so then I had a couple of music projects, and they just kind of fizzled, faded. But for some reason, I just liked the name Cargo Ship Poet. And so then when I started posting on Instagram, I used that.
Yeah, dude, it's such a cool name. The cargo ship poet. And honestly, I don't think I've seen anybody with quite the creative expression in that way. Like, you're very multifaceted. You play guitar as well, right?
I do. And that's what kept me writing, is songwriting over the years.
You were a lyricist first.
Yeah, so I was in a band in my 20s when I was in college, and then I enjoyed songwriting, but I never really developed it, and songwriting gave me the opportunity to write and not be an English major, you know?
I know, man. I wasn't an English major either. I hated writing.
Yeah.
It's funny. We had similar starts. You know, I was doing rap and rap lyrics at first. Then I switched over to poetry, and you were doing songwriting and lyrics in that way. And I think that's actually like a very common way to get into poetry, honestly, because you have that segue of you already have that self-expression, and then you take the element of, although it is, I have to say, I feel like poetry is vulnerable in a different way. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I think what has drawn me into it so much is being able to, like, I've started to write a few books in my life.
Right.
And I'll get to like the 5th or 6th chapters, and then I'll get derailed.
Right.
And with poetry, there is the option to go in, write it, and then put it out there, which is the glorious thing about Instagram. I'm very thankful for it providing that spark.
Yes.
That thrill to just keep creating.
Yeah. Instagram is such a double-edged sword too, because you have all of those elements of, you know, like you said, that instant gratification. You can build your following fast, you know, you can get your voice out there, and you can really impact people and help people. But you also have that other element of, if you get really ensnared in Instagram, it takes up so much time, and and you've got to work through all those worries about, I want this amount of followers, I want that amount of followers, I want this recognition, I wish I had this thing and that thing. And I think Instagram's actually a really interesting trigger for people, especially for artists.
You're right. It has been a quite the journey. I look at it as kind of being like it's like falling in love, the way it was when I first found the community. And just being head over heels and feeling so much like I was finally heard, and
Right.
just saying, I found a place. And then experiencing these kind of mental collapses.
Right.
That perhaps I was always somewhat prone to have, but having them happen almost weekly, having kind of trying to figure out my own illusions. And and being so close to the heater and its passion, and yet you start to see these red flags, and you try to I would try to compartmentalize and say, wait a second, why is this happening, and why is it triggering these emotions in me?
Exactly. I think Instagram is the perfect catalyst for self-growth, for introspection, and I think it really gets you in a state of surrender. So to to be somebody on Instagram who is doing what you're doing, putting your word out there, uh, putting your voice out there, it takes a certain amount of letting go and just allowing the process to happen. And that, like you said, that passion is something that is an ebb and flow, right?
Yeah.
It comes in and out, and it's something that for a lot of people, if you're not careful, Instagram can definitely take up a big aspect of a life. Instagram and social media in general is incredibly addicting. And I'll speak on myself here. Was when I was on Instagram my first few years, I loved it. I still do. I still love it. But it took a long, long time to find that balance. It took a long time to kind of step back and be like, whoa, okay, I'm kind of like trying too hard here.
Yeah.
And I was, in the beginning, I feel like it all happens so fast. Like you're writing your poetry, you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about your book, you're thinking about all this stuff, and you're just propelled out there, uh, proverbially into the universe with this work, and then you reach a period in time where you're just like, okay, like now it's truly about self-expression. It's less about it's more about the message and more about the integrity and the honesty of the words, and less about just getting as much work out there as you can.
Yes, I agree with that. And it does. It's funny because some of the things that drive me nuts about it are no different than the world
No.
and how it operates. It puts us right next to the furnace.
Right.
And it's interesting because my mind seems to become more and more aware of the way the world works. Because being a creative person, there is always a bit of delusion in the process. At least,
Yes.
especially starting out, because you're kind of like, hey, you create something and you think people are going to be like, this is, there. You can't help but think people are going to feel the same way you do,
Exactly.
especially starting out. And then real quickly, you find out it's a tough world. But, and then on Instagram, what's so interesting is when you first start out, you're new, you're passionate, and it takes a while to really realize how much of a negotiation it is when you first start, and how much you're kind of being targeted as somebody to jump on board.
Exactly. I think that the Instagram community is, for the most part, incredibly supportive. From day
Absolutely.
from day one, I felt great kinship from Instagram, and
Absolutely.
that was really surprising for me because in other parts of my life at the time when I first got on there, it was just like I was looking for a community. I was looking for people
Yeah,
to connect with, share my work with,
absolutely.
true friends. And I think we all reach a point in our lives where we get to this point where those shallow connections fall away, the surface level connections fall away, and you start meeting people that you don't have attachment to, that you can have that real connection with, and there's no expectation. Nobody's expecting you to do something for them. Instead, there's just that common bond of heart and kinship.
Yes, it's something like so much longed for, and then it gets. I think the mind can only handle so much, and so as we establish more and more connections with people, and especially people who want to have a deeper connection than
Right.
just straight up like for a number. It gets to the point sometimes when you have depth that it gets so overwhelming to keep up with all the connections you make.
So true.
And that is one of the things that is really tricky. It's been really tricky for me is because I have been a person who's been willing to kind of say, hey, I want people to read, I will read your poetry. And times I've been so tangled up in my own ideals to have it just blaring, like a big flashing light. Wait a second, it's hard to have depth and a lot of connections in this community. It's
Definitely.
overwhelming. And so, yet, and I think that's a unique thing that Instagram poets have to deal with, or have to learn to work with, is having connections, having depth, and have it being on a speedway of words where truly it's most designed for the micro poets.
Correct.
It's most designed for the micro poets, and a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful thing that people have depth there, but it overheats the brain often, I think.
I couldn't agree more. I think that it is truly about finding balance in your life. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to step away from Instagram and just do the self work and then come back and be like, you know what? Like, I can post one thing a day. I can respond to people when I get to it. And it's not that big of a deal because nobody's projecting anything onto me. Those are just my own thoughts and my own ideas. So that finding that balance with Instagram, it is tricky, but I feel like the more that you detach from Instagram as a construct, as an idea, as what you're supposed to be on it or what you're supposed to do on it, the freer you can be to move through those connections in a more flowy way.
So I agree. The balance of art and community
There's
is
such a balance there. Another thing I was wondering was, how did you get started as a musician? Where did that start?
so. Like I didn't play in high school. Like I always had a song in my head, and then it was really in my 20s, like early 20s, that I started to just kind of write songs, and usually they were just funny, real two chords, and I didn't really think much of it, but I started to play and have fun with it, campfires, and then one day I was working. This was before I went to college. I was working in a factory, and a guy there had been in a band. We went to a park, and I showed him a song I'd written, a 2-chord, 3-chord is a stretch, but a 3-chord song I'd written about vampires. And then he was like, let's start a band. And then we started to play, and because we were connected in this factory circuit, we worked with all these people. We got a big following, and it's in Logan, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden we start playing, and I have this thing where I just, like, brutally, like, I want the crowd to be involved. And so I go out in the crowd. I do things that were kind of out of the ordinary for engagement. And we had just a really good time, and it was really my alter ego that stepped out. I ended up, after a while, decided I was like, I want to be a better band than the band I'm in. We were good, but we had to only so have a feeling. And so then I joined a kind of a super group for a little valley.
Right.
And we started Blind Iris. And it was cool because we set out to really do something. And I do believe, like, if we have a goal, if we drive for it passionately, we will end up getting to that goal. It just may be a totally different goal from what we pictured. It may be
Right.
And so I had said, I want to have our band be heard across the nation. And then we ended up a Tony Hawk video game, Thug.
Really?
We were on the soundtrack a soundtrack that actually won an MTV Music Award. On that soundtrack, we were one of 72 bands on the soundtrack. So it wasn't a game changer, but it was cool because we still get like 10,000 listens on Spotify.
That's
And
awesome.
it's cool. It's cool to have that. And it changed my thinking to a certain degree to be like, you know what? If you put it out and you drive towards it passionately, things will happen.
Right. Yeah, I really agree with that as well. I definitely agree with the law of attraction. I don't think it works like a lot of people think it works, in the sense where you sit back and you allow everything to come to you. I think that there's a certain amount of action involved that comes naturally, that is part of the path.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really a big hang up there. I'm just addressing, like books like The Secret, stuff like that, where they talk about attracting your heart's desire, attracting your perfect life. And I think that process is very, very intimate, very involved, and less about, it is about letting it come to you, but you have to meet it halfway. And I think that what most people kind of have the idea of is you just sit back and then you allow things to come to you. But there's actually more involvement in the process than that. And I think that you in your life, you've definitely experienced the action part. Like, you went out there, you did it, you attracted those things because they were in alignment with you. And that's been your practice.
Yeah. It's funny because when we started that band, and I just put it out there, like I went and I just go to the bar. I don't drink that much,
Right.
but I would go and just talk to people and tell them, hey, yeah, we're going to do this, creating buzz. And I ended up talking to a guy who ended up getting us a connection with this guy out in this podunk town, who ended up getting us the connection with Neversoft. So this was probably like 8 months into starting the band. And I tell you this because after like that 8 months, we got this huge break. And then we kind of waited for the game to come out, and we let off the gas because we got that break. And so then, while we still put out another album, it goes back to what you just said. You have to meet it halfway. You can't ever let off the gas even when you get a break. Because it's about movement. Motion is emotion. And you can't sit back and wait for it. You always have to be moving forward.
So true. And I think that it's necessary for people to have in their life periods of time where it's more slow and quiet, and then things accelerate. I think those break periods really make us. I think there's, like, for example, like what's happening in the world right now with the quarantine. I think a lot of people are at home. A lot of people are they're left with their thoughts. They're left with their without the momentum, with their constructs, with the ideas of who they're supposed to be. And then there's an evaluating process. There's a process of introspection and going through some change.
Well, for sure. It is. I don't know if you've ever read the Road Less Traveled.
I've heard of it many times. I actually haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, and that was because I was married back in the factory days when I worked there before I. Anyway, I was married, and after I got divorced, I got this book and I read it. And one of the things that I kind of figured out, are there are people who always blame others, and they never really progress. And then there's people who often kind of blame themselves. They, feel accountable. And while it's still kind of a character disorder, it does help people grow because they're taking accountability, even though sometimes the accountability is more than they should.
Right.
And I definitely experienced that myself, where I fall into these pits of overthinking but at that same time, it gives me the opportunity to say, hey, to build a new bridge,
Right.
to move forward.
And I think those times are the perfect times where you kind of learn a compassion practice in your life, where you look at the thing, the thought, whatever you're overthinking about, and you sit with it for long enough where it loses its power. And
Yeah,
then over time, it just clears out because you have your awareness on it. But that can't happen without a break. That can't happen when you're on the go. It has to happen when you're in those moments where you can't go anywhere else, or
true.
you're choosing to look at it and not look away.
Yeah, I agree. It is. You just square the shoulders and then you power forward. And all the times that I've just been like, wanted to be like, I just got to stop Instagram. I think most people who are on Instagram feel that way sometimes.
Definitely.
Uh, I also realize that without it, the passion, the passion is part of the fall, the continued kind of falling apart. Well, life could be boring, but Instagram gives me a way to feel passion, and the bottoming out is just part of the journey,
Right.
part of the prize.
So true. To you, what do you think a what do you feel your ideal? Do you think that what you're doing with Instagram, if you could move that into more of an area where your art became your career, do you think that would make you happy?
Uh, well, that's a good question. Well, there's two ways to look at it. Without a doubt, it is the pursuit of doing something big that is so much a part of the joy.
Mm-hmm.
So I I believe that it would make me happy for a minute, but part of what makes us successful is we always want more. And once we reach something, if, happiness is motion
Mm-hmm.
and a strong center that is always looking to learn.
I love that. That's beautiful,
Okay.
man. So let me think from there. I think that for me, with art,
Yeah.
with art and turning it into a career, it's definitely been a process, and I have to say that
Yeah.
the process has been less about necessarily being happy, but more about finding balance within myself and finding contentment in my momentary life, second to second, moment to moment. And that's honestly been less through my work and more through meditation, more through facing the hard things I've had to face internally, and all of that stuff. I think that makes me happy. But the reason I brought up the art career and happiness was because I feel like a lot of poets and a lot of writers have an idea that their writing is what's going to make them happy, and it's what's going to create a perfect life.
Yeah. I that's an interesting view on it.
I think it's pretty
Because
common.
oh, I do too. I just don't know if I've thought of it quite that way, but I do agree. I it is kind of a we kind of create our own illusion like it's going to yeah. I know what you're saying. I do.
So I think that at least for me, when I first started out with poetry, uh, I really didn't have. It was the one place in my life where I didn't really have an attachment to what it was supposed to be for me. Because when I started doing rap and I started doing hip hop and stuff like that, it was more along the lines of, "Wow, this is so fun." Uh, it just comes to me. It comes naturally, and I've never had anything in my life happen like that. Everything always had to be work, work, work. You know, it was always analytical. It was always about thinking. But this just came out of nowhere. You know, it just started happening, and I was just like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
this is something else." And I think the journey for me going through the process was getting back to a very pure place where it could get back to that again. Whereas we build up all these emotions, attachments around our work and what it's supposed to be. And then getting back to the place when you're just doing it to have fun, and you're doing it because you love it. And I think that that place is a place that creates, you know, success, creates masterpieces, creates incredible work that people vibe with and they really, really resonate with. And I think that that place is found at the beginning and at the end of searching in some ways. Because once the searcher stops searching, it's more about becoming the words, becoming the practice, becoming the truth of your nature, all that you are. And in that place, you're not really forcing anything. You're not really trying. I would dare say you're almost not even striving. It's just coming to you because it is what you're meant for. It's what you're meant to do.
A sense of purpose.
Yeah, purpose.
Yes, absolutely. And there is no doubt in my mind that the, that the Instagram experience has given me a sense of purpose, and my brain works better.
Right.
I seem to be more aware of things, and it just seems to be a muscle that I am constantly able to flex.
Right.
And
I love your stories, dude. You really, you absolutely, you take us on an adventure.
It's a story. Define stories.
So I'm going to give you an example of one. I think there was one about going hunting with wolves, going hunting for wolves, and it was about two guys in the bar talking. And then one guy's just like, "Oh, I wanted to think I'm tough. I wanted to think I'm tough," and and then he invited him. And I think that the narration there, the storytelling there was awesome, and I was really entertained by that story.
Oh, good. And it's one that I got halfway through, and it's all a true story. And that was humbling, actually. That because when I was writing that story, I realized how bad I was at writing dialogue, and and I got to a point where I was like, "Holy cow!" It made me look in the mirror, stand in it, with my shirt off, look at my abs, my writing abs, and be like, "Holy cow, Jon, you've got a long way to go." But that's a good thing, There's so much freedom and space to work with poetry, and there's only a couple things I truly believe, and one is that people should write whichever way they want to.
So true.
I'm not a big. I don't. One thing that is interesting to me is sometimes I feel that there are kind of these old sayings that get taken out of perspective, and I'll name one, and that is write it right from the vein, and I agree with it. Like, make it real, feel it, present something that means something.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like I see this kind of a growing voice that's telling people, you've got to write sad, you've got to make people feel like, they got spiders on their skin. And I support it. Yet sometimes I think people are afraid to step out of that and be like, with words I can explore. With words I can dig a grave and I can climb out of it.
Right.
And I'm not sure exactly why I went on that tangent.
No, it's great.
Or I think sometimes there has become such a strong voice in the community that likely spawned from seeing the success of people like Atticus and other people who are writing short, because it's commercially a good way to go to write short. But then people become like, you don't write short or it's horrible. And I just want to be like, look, write short, write long, write whatever you're feeling at the time, experiment, play around. Because sometimes I feel like it's kind of a resentment for the successful poet. And me feeling the same way at times, being like, oh my gosh, this person isn't saying a whole lot and they're getting 5,000 likes or 20,000 likes. But writing short is a great way to reach a lot of people. And then write a long one. Write one that's 10 pages long. Let's get away from saying this is right or wrong and get back to saying express yourself, how you're feeling. Express it, get it out, and have fun with it. Light or dark.
Exactly.
Long or short. Try different things. Because I know I'm going on throwing add-ons here.
Dude, you've got all the space in the world. Keep running it.
So I look sometimes, and I think people are afraid to write shorter poetry, and then can't help but feel a little bit of resentment when maybe they're not getting the results that they want. And so then it becomes kind of a quagmire of pain. And I just want to tell them, like, hey, it's good to have depth, but you don't always have to have depth. You can also have fun. Anyway, yeah, it's interesting to read people's thoughts.
I think that, honestly, if it's you and it's genuine, whether it's you're writing a poem, a poetry short story, or if you're just writing one line, if it's genuine, if you're not doing it because first of all, I think, like you said, the truth is you can't do it for the likes. You have to do it. Yeah. You have to do it because that's your self-expression. And if you're doing it because you're trying to gain something from other people or get those likes, then it's not going to work out, because you're never going to be satisfied. You're always going to be trying to improve that formula. And the formula at its nature is flawed. So you're never going to be able to get what you're looking for out of it.
I agree. And that is one of the prime battles is the numbers. When numbers got in bed with words, and that's when a lot of the madness was created, because I do it too. I'll go along. I'll just be like, I'm just expressing myself. I'm just doing this. I don't care. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, the number starts to just bark in my ear, and being like, and then I get tied into numbers, and that's where those fallouts come. And it's so hard not to sometimes get consumed by it, but that's part of the battle, is to keep expressing. And yet the tricky thing too is we have to do it for the art. I guess most poets, if you peel back a layer or two, also like the idea of becoming a notable poet in whether it be history or making some money. We all probably kind of want that to some degree. We all probably deep down inside are like, I want to sell a ton of books.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of everybody's dream, to have that passive income to sell those books. And I think that element to it is actually really, so I'm a proponent of, it's okay to want these things. It's just, don't tell yourself that you don't, and don't tell yourself that you're doing it for a different reason. Be completely honest with yourself about it, because it's not conflicting to want to be human but also want to express that inner nature and want to express in a true way. So I think that there's so many poets in the community that think they have to sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah.
But it's actually about saying, I am human. Yeah, I want these things. I want success. I want to have. I want to be a successful poet. I want to be a known poet. And inherently, we all have an aspect of us that wants people to like us, and that's okay, because that's just us looking for that greater connection. It's not an awful thing. I think that a lot of people have been taught that that's an awful thing. That, oh, I shouldn't be looking for this. There's a conflict there that has to be worked through.
Yeah. There is. What do you mind if I ask you a question?
Let's do it.
What are some of what are risks that you see in the community, big or small?
Risks. I find risks. I think that when somebody is set into writing about a certain emotion, or writing about a certain into a certain style of writing, but it's not coming to them in a natural way, and they just feel like they have to do it to give to become something, like you said. So if you're giving away your genuineness, if you're giving that away to reach that fame, to reach that glory, to reach whatever you want to call it, I think that that's always dangerous. Just like you always see in music, artists selling out. I think that that's something that's huge in the poetry community on Instagram, because people see the famous writers like Atticus, Tyler Knott, all these people, and they say, damn, I love that style. I wish I had that style. And then they hop into that style and they start making stuff that looks very similar, and they start getting results. So they're getting results. So it's almost like positive feedback, and it's something that down the line they have to contend with. You kind of have to go through it again. You have to go through the process of being like, damn, that really wasn't me, and I feel like I wasn't doing myself justice there. And that's a process I think people contend with. But
That's interesting. So you're saying they're kind of building their own they're building their own monster that they live in its shadow, that
yes,
they're
yeah,
mimicking. They're
yep.
not being real. I can see that for sure.
And I also think Instagram runs away with a lot of people. I think that personalities are enlarged. I think egos grow 10 times larger sometimes with people. And then that's the point where people are just, it's very like you said, disillusioning for them. They have an idea of what they're supposed to be, and they have to live up to this crazy large idea. And then when there's chinks in the armor, they either beat themselves up, or they're called out for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I do believe that, especially in the poet community, and I know like in the yoga community too, that I heard of the same things, but I do think it triggers neurosis in most all people who participate in it. That doesn't mean, and that is the battle, is to not let it trigger it, but it is something that kind of calls to the ego, participating in it, and it is such a where there's light, there's darkness, and the another thing that I think is really tricky is sometimes this is in later on in the podcast, so I don't know if anybody will hear it or not. So that might be a good thing, but I do think sometimes it's hard on the brain to jump around every minute to a different theme. Sometimes your brain can feel like a pinball, and then at times it can almost make it like there was a time when I was just like, I'm going to read every post, and I did. And I remember like two of those 10,000 posts. That's probably an over-exaggeration, but poetry is such a thing to possibly read under a tree in a quiet place and to let it absorb into your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of conveyor belt of poetry is a good thing for each individual overall. Let it out. Yet sometimes I think it can really rattle a reader's brain, and at some point we may not really be absorbing as much when we're in a frenzy to read as much as we can because we enjoy it or because we feel like we owe it to other people.
I couldn't agree more. And I don't read nearly as much poetry as I used to. Just on Instagram, you know, when I hop on there, I scroll a little bit, then I get off pretty much as fast as I get on. Because the truth is, if you're not putting your full attention to it, which honestly, I wouldn't recommend anybody, and I'm going to say this too, I wouldn't recommend anybody to put a big chunk of their day to any social media. Because the whole point of poetry is in my opinion, self-meditation, taking that in and feeling the words. Poetry is always about feeling. So if either you're not in a space to do that, or if you have a habit of just, you know, reading and reading without even looking at anything really, just scrolling to scroll, which is an addiction, you know. I think 99% of people who are on social media scroll. And I think that how much of that time can really be used to absorb a message or to sit with it and let it sink in. And I think that we're all in that place. I think that's it's very rare. Now on the other hand, I think that the times that you do have the awareness to sit and look at something and really take your time and absorb it. Those can be definitely powerful moments, and it can lead you to getting that book and sitting under that tree and having a good read.
Yeah.
But I think that more often than not, Instagram is a conveyor belt, I think, of content. And that is a dangerous thing for the mind, because what we really want is to find some peace, but then we hop on there mistakenly to get our fix, and then we're disjointed and discombobbled and thrown all over the place.
Yeah, it exactly. That's how I feel about it too. Exactly. Yeah, your words exactly.
I think that most people, well, I think in general now, I think that if anybody who, like you said, if anybody who is listening to this point, a good practice to have is to kind of take a minute of awareness when you're on Instagram and ask yourself, what am I doing? Is it out of habit or pattern, or is it intentional? And to try to make those moments more intentional and try to make those moments more, I'm doing this because I'm choosing to do it. I'm not doing it because I've been doing it for 3 years or for 6 months. And it's kind of like smoking, you know? I'm sure that first cigarette that you smoked was intentional. But 3 years later, is that cigarette really intentional?
Yeah, I just got an itch in my throat. The joy of podcasting. Yeah, me and my buddy, we, one second.
No, you're good, bro.
Yeah, I don't even smoke, so. But I think I may have just lost my voice some. It'll come back. Yeah, I agree. There's a yin and a yang.
There's an addiction element to it. There's definitely that. And that's something that I don't think many people talk about. I don't think it's a popular thing to talk about. Whereas, you know, people going through anxiety, depression, other addictions, very, very common to talk about. But social media addiction, I think that's a real thing. And I think that's something that actually gets people, usually the things that people are triggered by the most, are the things that they're most attached to and the things that they would have the hardest time giving up. And I feel like social media puts a lot of people up in arms.
Oh, it does for sure. That's been an interesting thing too. because I have a podcast. Me and my friend did 50 of them.
That's awesome.
It's called Nowhere to Joe. And it's kind of held me back from telling people about it, which is a good thing. The reason is, one of the things I've really liked about the Instagram poet community is I become a much more sensitive person. Being able to get vision into the world and learn to be sensitive in a place where people all over the planet can read our work. And there's times I remember when I first started, and it was just like, wow, it was liberating. I was full on Atticus character, running wild, whiskey, just like, people hear me, I can just be who I want to be.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then at some point, all of a sudden, I remember somebody telling me, I don't remember who it was, and somebody was like, all the drama here. And I was like, what drama? Like the most noob thing I could say, drama. And then all of a sudden I started to see these fires break out. And especially, and this is something I don't know if people talk about, and it is a crazy part of it. And that is, and I remember when I first came out, I was so fascinated because you had women talking so openly. And then if you talk to somebody, then they were just like open to hear what you said. And it was just like this utopian society when I first started, drunk on whiskey. I thought it was so interesting. And then I've watched this since then, is this pattern of often, do you remember the Eddie Murphy Raw, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about like and we're going way back, like he did a joke like on cavemen or something, or maybe it was Bill Cosby, but it was like, like the guy was like, like a caveman, like, come here, babe. And then like the woman was like, come here, get away, come here, get away. And just, it's the most basic element of man and woman. It's what keeps us alive, right? And then coming into this community and seeing this openness, and then you'd see people who would get really hurt, and then you'd see a guy who would just be like hung up on a stick, being like, that is a horrible human, and see a group of people who just hated this guy, and a woman who was devastated and in so much pain. And it was so interesting to see this friction and this openness, and how every once in a while it would just start a fire. It would just start people being so angry because people are so open as poets.
That's so true. It's raw. I have to say, the Instagram poetry community is raw. I mean, just because of kind of, I guess, the style I write in, I don't really see that much of it. But
yeah.
But when I hop on the poetry hashtags, I go to poetry community, I hop in to those hashtags, I can see the dynamic, and I can see the disagreements, and I can see all this stuff. I'm just like, wow, like you said, that's fascinating. It's fascinating that there's more human connection in a place where people aren't physically interacting than there is when people are physically interacting. Because many people would say things that they wouldn't in real life on Instagram. And yeah.
Because I've always had, like, I think sometimes when I get stressed out, like sometimes I would kind of want a creative write, or just kind of like send an email to somebody and be like, hey, what's up, blah, blah, blah. And I always felt misunderstood anytime I ever did it. And it wasn't anything like aggressive. It was more just kind of light banter. And then coming into the community, all of a sudden it was just like, that was just open arms. Like it would be like, oh yes, it was so weird coming into a place that I felt so understood, where the banter seemed to be just like fit, like a plug, and so that's a really cool thing. But I think that like I bounce around quite a bit, but I find like if I write romantic poetry, then it creates its own biodome, that is, and then it's like and then I want to change to humor. Like humor is kind of my favorite thing because it almost has the fewest sharp edges, except then sometimes when I fall into when I stumble, I feel like a joke. But then it's almost better. But then like write romantic, and you start to it creates an illusion of this or that, or you write sad, and then it starts to feel like you're sad, and everybody's sad, and it's funny, just the law of attraction.
Yep.
With what you write and how it builds.
What you see in you are what you see. You are what you see in the world, and the opposite is also true. If you are sad, you're going to see all the sadness in the world. If you're happy, you're going to see all the happiness. If you're neutral, well, you're going honestly, that's the place where you could see them all. So I have to say that there's no attraction or pushing away from that place. But from all these other places, definitely what you're saying is true, because you will see in the world what you are feeling, and it's amplified.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It has really been fascinating. And I think that you have a mind that works a lot like mine, where you see what you build, kind of big picture mentality, where you may be fascinated by the social energy that's created, and then having that humanistic approach, or seeking to understand people while seeking to find balance.
Right, and I think
internally.
A big thing that I've learned is learning to keep your boundaries, and learning to be like, listen, like this is my energy, this is your energy. You don't have the inherent right to hop over the fence. And I think that what a lot of people do like to do is hop over the fence, and they like to either try to tell you how you should write, how you should be, how to make yourself get to that next level, or another thing is they try to talk you up. So there's two ends to that spectrum, and both are actually harmful to people. Because if somebody talks you up, then you have this inflated sense of self, where if you get any criticism, then it's absolutely devastating. And if you're always getting talked up, then one negative review could kill you. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you have that other energy, if you have the energy of somebody always constantly hopping on the other side of the fence, bringing you down, then you get that deep-rooted insecurity. And but the truth is, before you get into that conversation, you need to understand that this is you, this is your energy, this is who you are, this is just your message. This isn't something that is negotiable. I think people like to negotiate with their work in that way, but it needs to become a part of self that isn't negotiable.
Yeah, I thought at the end of the day, it has to be, the core has to be built around art.
Right.
Community is a beautiful thing, but it has so many sharp edges.
So true.
And such a wonderful thing, but it's got so many sharp edges.
And this is a very dual conversation. I love this about it, because this is what I like. I'm going to tell you that I'm not the kind of person to just talk about the happy, the good, the beauty. I want to talk about both, and I want to talk about how life is a dual thing, and life is about the tragedy and the triumph. And I think that's the message people need to hear, because I think that we're taught that things have to end in a happy ending, but a happy ending, there is no happy ending. There is just constant unfoldment and changing. And that's where the duality and the truth of where life lies.
So true.
And we're getting to the end of the podcast here, Jon.
Yeah.
We absolutely killed it, man. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, well, it was a pleasure to talk to you. And if I wouldn't have that one time when I choked and lost my voice. Yeah, that just keeps it interesting.
That's the human element to it.
The human element for sure. And I respect what you do. I really, I'm grateful you asked me to be on here today, and I appreciate the conversations. It is, how much longer do we have?
I'd say 2 more minutes. Although I can always cut it down a little bit. Let's keep going and see what happens. I know Anchor can only go for an hour, so if we have to, we'll make it 2 parts.
Okay. That is something too that I've found is when I came on and I started as a poet in the community, and I kind of kept it quiet, and then I kind of told my friends. I realized, so it's kind of interesting because you're in in a community, and people, you feel like you've got a magnet. You feel like it's almost easy for a while, and then your friends come in, and they're outside of the community, and they're like, "What the hell's going on here?"
Exactly.
Who are you? And then, in addition to that, you get I lost my train of thought a little bit on it, but the bottom line is, it's good to talk about it because sometimes it's the stuff that people aren't talking about.
So true.
And then you don't really have anybody around you can talk about it. And then sometimes talking about it in a DM, well, our necks start to hurt, and we can't spend too much time looking at our phones. But it's still you don't even want to talk to somebody because you don't want it to be taken the wrong way,
right,
in a text form. So having it in an open forum, I really do appreciate the opportunity to kind of get it out of my head and talk to the person in the community with words, with our voices.
Exactly. And we'll have many, many more podcasts in the future. You bet on that.
Awesome, man.
And where can people find you? What's the best place to find your work and to just, if they need to, to reach out to you if you want?
Cargo Ship Poet is my Instagram. If you want to listen to my band, Blind Iris, so check out music there. And then where else? Nowhere to Joe is the podcast, if anybody gets bored. But those are my 3 creative things that are available out there. But they can more than happy to reach out to me on Cargo Ship Poet on Instagram.
And I'm going to check out Blind Iris right after we finish this podcast up.
Check out The Tattered Tale of Brown Butterfly. I always like that song. It's not the most popular one, but The Tattered Tale of Brown Butterfly. And that was kind of my first big-time poetic song.
So awesome. Enjoy your night, brother.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Love and strength, my friend. Thank you so much.